Ohio Senate to vote today on bill to ban transgender girls from female sports. House Bill 68, which passed the House earlier this year, would prohibit transgender girls and women from playing on female sports teams in high school and college. And that is today. That is today. So very interesting. I'm going to see how this plays out, but it looks like there was an update just about 20 minutes ago. Well, 2 hours and 20 minutes ago. So we'll see what this looks like, but let's dive into it a little bit. The Ohio Senate will vote Wednesday on whether to ban transgender girls from female sports and restrict the medical care of transgender minors. House Bill 68, which passed the House earlier this year, would prohibit transgender girls and women from playing on female sports teams in high school and college. It would also prevent doctors from prescribing hormones, puberty blockers, or gender reassignment surgery before the patient turns 18. A change added Wednesday would allow Ohioans already receiving hormones or puberty blockers to continue doing so, as long as doctors decide stopping them would cause harm. Proponents say the measure is necessary to protect children, but LGBTQ advocates and healthcare providers contend it peddles misinformation about transgender medical care and could harm young Ohioans who need treatment. House Bill 68 will cause people to leave Ohio, and no one should be forced from their home for any reason, but especially not because of extreme laws undermining their freedom and their safety, said Dara Atkinson, an advocate with Trans Ohio. Ohio is our home too, and it always will be. This is a fine line to walk, I think. I think that, a lot of this is, you really have to consider the economical standpoint from this as well, because bills like this will absolutely, and has historically, forced people to leave their home states in pursuit of the care that they require. And we see this with abortion rights and stuff too. And I feel like that conversation gets lost in a lot of this, is that if we have all these people moving to a different state to get the medical care that they need, then that person, that family, is not contributing to the economy in the state that they moved from anymore. And so it can also discourage people from moving to that state. So there has to be a real consideration for the economical standpoint here as well. But let's continue. Ohio Senate adds changes on parental consent. The legislation does not ban talk therapy, but it requires mental health providers to get permission from at least one parent or guardian to diagnose and treat gender dysmorphia. A previous version of the bill required consent from both parents or guardians. Senate Republicans on Wednesday also removed a provision that would have delayed the law's effective date for 6 months. Some parents may say, "My parents beat me with a stick until I was black and blue, and I'm going to do the same thing to my kid." Well, we prohibit that, Senate President Matt Huffman said. So somewhere along the line, the state does have to intervene. It really is a protection of the child kind of thing. Okay. If you liken giving your trans child the care that they need to beating them black and blue with a stick, I don't know. I think you've lost the plot a little bit. For transgender student athletes, House Bill 68 says the genitalia a child is born with determine what sports teams they can play on. Right now, the Ohio High School Athletic Association allows transgender girls to join female teams if they've completed at least 1 year of hormone therapy. As of 2022, only one transgender girl played on an Ohio varsity team. So my opinion of the trans thing, the trans athlete thing, especially when it comes to young people, is that I think you should focus less on how long somebody has been on HRT and focus more on how long have their hormones been in range of what they should be for that gender. For example, like a trans boy, right? Make sure his testosterone is in the right level for a year or two. For a trans girl, make sure that her estrogen is in the right level for a year or two. Because they're absolutely, you can certainly dose a lot less and still maintain that testosterone and still meet those requirements. So I think that should be the focus of the conversation when it comes to trans athletes, is checking their hormone levels and making sure that they're in range for a certain amount of time. Miranda says it's so devious that they always group the youth medical bans with the sports bans. The sports bans shouldn't be as popular as they are, but the sad truth is that they are. And these Republicans know what they're doing when they group them together in the same bills. Yeah, I agree with you. It's unclear how the bill will fare if it reaches Governor Mike DeWine's desk. The governor opposed previous efforts to ban transgender girls and women from female sports. That measure was initially separate from the medical care bill, but House lawmakers combined them into one proposal. I think Ohioans should be puzzled why they're not being listened to, Senate Minority Leader Nikki Antonio said. They have told us twice that they don't want the government interfering in their health care, and here we are again, not only interfering in their health care, we're usurping the ability of parents to make decisions for themselves. The story will be updated, it says. Let's see if there's any updates for this. Is it not? Okay. Okay, there we go. Close that. Oh, I guess it hasn't been updated. And they removed the line that said the story will be updated. And they changed the time. Oh, okay. I guess it was updated. So they voted Wednesday to ban transgender girls from female sports and restrict the medical care of transgender minors. Was it that they were going to? And then they did? It's crazy to see an article updated like this, almost in real time as I'm reading it. Which passed the House earlier this year. Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, here's an update. The Senate approved the bill 24-8 with just one Republican opposing it, prompting cries of shame from protesters outside the chamber. It now heads back to the House for a final vote on changes made by Senate Republicans. Interesting. Senators also removed a provision that would have delayed the law's effective date for 6 months. Ugh. As of 2022, only one transgender girl played on an Ohio varsity team. Yeah, it's always that they focus these athlete bans in places where historically you have a very, very low number of trans athletes. And the big picture is that trans people are still a minority. And when you go into, like, athletes technically are a minority too. Most people are not athletes, okay? So when you narrow things down that far to focus just solely on writing and passing legislation that focuses only on transgender athletes, you're talking about a very minuscule amount of people. And you have to pause and ask yourself, is it really worth the effort to focus all of this attention on, according to this, one transgender girl? That's it. All this for one person. It does seem a little ridiculous. A DeWine spokesman said the governor is monitoring the bill but declined to comment further. Okay. Miranda says, have you seen the letter written by the Republican governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, on this issue? Governor Cox really said it quite elegantly, even as a Republican. No, I haven't. If you want to post a link in the chat, I'm happy to take a look at it. But yeah, this is a little ridiculous. I think it's just simply that this is a very popular wedge issue for Republicans to use, especially when re-elections are coming up, that they can stand on their platform and denounce all of these trans athletes and stuff. And it turns out that, well, you're actually talking about a little, really, really tiny amount of people here. people can be really deceptive with their words, you know? Like these Republicans say that they posit that this is a huge issue and that there are so many trans athletes just vying to take the rights away of our cis women citizens. But when you look further into it, it's just like one girl in high school, and that's it. Here's the article. Let's see. Okay. Here's Utah Governor Cox's statement on vetoing the trans sports bill. When in doubt, however, I always try to err on the side of kindness, mercy, and compassion. March 22nd, 2022, the Honorable J. Stewart Adams, President of the Senate, and the Honorable Brad R. Wilson, Speaker of the House. Mr. President and Mr. Speaker, I believe in fairness and protecting the integrity of women's sports. I know both of you are committed to these same ideals and that we have worked very hard together to resolve many of the issues surrounding transgender student participation in sports. Unfortunately, HB 11 has several fundamental flaws and should be reconsidered. Because the bill was substantially changed in the final hours of the legislative session with no public input, and in a way that will likely bankrupt the Utah High School Athletic Association and result in millions of dollars in legal fees for local school districts with no state protection, and for several other reasons below, I've chosen to veto this bill. The transgender sports participation issue is one of the most divisive of our time, because there are logical and passionate arguments by many parties. Finding compromise or common ground can be difficult. Sadly, there is very little room for nuance in this debate, but I hope you will permit me an opportunity to explain my reasons for vetoing HB 11. Utah has a history of trying to approach complicated issues in ways that bring collaboration and fairness. From immigration and criminal justice reform to LGBTQ protections and religious freedom, Utah has often shown an unusual willingness to find new and compassionate ways to solve the most toxic debates of our time. For this reason, I was heartened and encouraged to see legislators sitting down with LGBTQ advocates to work on a compromise that would both protect women's sports and allow some participation for our most marginalized transgender youth. No other state has done this, and we hope that Utah could be the first. As you know, the negotiations centered around the potential compromise of a commission of experts that would help decide on an individual basis which kids would be able to participate. The concept was very simple. For the very small number of transgender kids who are looking to find a sense of connection and community without posing any threat to women's sports, the commission would allow participation. However, the committee would prohibit participation in the rare circumstance of an outlier who could pose a safety threat or dominate a sport in a way that would eliminate competitive opportunities for biological females. Unfortunately, over time, the negotiations got bogged down debating the makeup of the commission and some of the language in the bill. While we were not able to reach an agreement on the commission, the bill sponsors did agree to remove some of the most troubling language. As the hallmark of a good compromise, neither side was thrilled, but there was a path forward. And while I admit it was not perfect, there was general agreement that we could pass the bill and continue tweaking the concept during the next year as necessary. On the last day of the legislative session, we began hearing rumors of a fourth substitute bill that would implement an all-out ban, with the new commission only coming into play if a court prohibited the ban. While it is not unusual to have legislators propose changes to bills, it is unusual to have major overhauls proposed at the last minute on significant policy issues that had been the subject of so much negotiation. It is even rarer to have these pass, especially with no communication with those who had been negotiating the issue. So you can imagine my surprise when the fourth substitute was revealed late on the last day of the session and debated and passed just a few hours before midnight. It is important to note that a complete ban was never discussed, never contemplated, never debated, and never received any public input prior to the legislature passing the bill on the 45th and final night of the session. For this reason, many legislators who might have otherwise supported the policy felt compelled to vote against it. I believe in process. How we make policy matters almost as much as the policy itself. An opportunity to participate is a critical component of public trust. While changes are inevitable, this was more than just a cosmetic change. This was a complete reversal of every discussion, public or private. Every article written by the media on this issue was about the commission and a compromise. Every answer given during press availability was about the commission and a compromise. Much of the debate that night centered around the difficulties of bad process and a lack of time to get constituent input. This lack of time and input has serious legal and financial implications as well. More on that below. And while I appreciate the apologies I have received from legislators involved in the truncated proceeding, I feel a veto is necessary to improve the process and to better allow the public an opportunity to weigh in. One of the worst results of that process was the inability of legislators to understand the financial impacts that will be forced upon the Utah High School Athletic Association and local Utah school districts that will inevitably get sued under this bill. The association is a private organization and runs the real risk of insolvency and bankruptcy, putting our entire state athletics program in danger. Having just completed a lengthy and very expensive lawsuit, the organization does not have significant reserves on hand. Furthermore, the association has been clear that if the state ever attempted a ban, the state would also need to provide indemnification to hold the organization harmless in the forthcoming lawsuit. Unfortunately, HB 11 provides no financial protection for the association, only an explicit invitation for a lawsuit. With several lawsuits already being litigated across the country, why would Utah insist, even encourage, expensive and debilitating legal action with no recourse for the organization that serves our own student athletes in schools? I hope you can agree that if we want to protect women's sports, bankrupting the institution that is responsible for their participation is a bad place to start. Yeah, I agree with that, actually. To make matters worse, shortly after the introduction of the fourth substitute, there was a hastily adopted amendment to explicitly exclude Utah's local schools from indemnification. Because the fourth substitute was so quickly introduced, and at the very end of the session, there was significant confusion at the time about the reason such a clause was necessary and the impact it would have. Clearly, the reason for the amendment was to avoid a fiscal note that could not have been funded at such a late hour without nullifying the bill. However, during the discussion on the Senate floor, it was incorrectly argued that the government immunity would protect schools from a lawsuit based on the ban. Because these lawsuits would involve potential civil rights violations, they would not qualify for governmental immunity. This means that schools would inevitably face costly litigation and the potential for significant damages. For this reason, many schools across the state of Utah have reached out expressing concern. Had they been aware of the language of the fourth substitute with enough time to comment, they undoubtedly would have shared a similar message with legislators who were forced to vote on the bill with no public input. Again, why would we risk significant legal exposure for some of our poorest schools with no financial support when other states are already funding identical legal defenses across the country? If the state insists on a policy that encourages significant litigation, I believe the state should pay for the litigation. It is my understanding that you have polled your members and that you have significant 2/3 of a majority to override a veto. Should this occur, I will immediately call a special session to change the section of the bill in order to avoid bankrupting our athletic association and local schools. A simple veto override will not resolve this fundamental issue. I also think it's important to address some of the arguments that came up during the passing of the fourth substitute of the bill. Many legislators brought up the trans swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania, who has recently dominated women's swimming, setting records and lapping the field. I agree with those who are concerned with this egregious example. I believe this is terrible for women's sports. There are natural advantages that come from our birth sex, which is the very reason that we have men and women's sports in the first place. Setting records and taking scholarships away from biological gendered women should give everyone pause. It's bad for women, and it is bad for the LGBTQ community, as it turns allies and reasonable people into opponents. I don't believe that this type of participation is compelled by the Constitution, but that this decision will be left to the courts in the months and years to come. However, there are a few problems with this example being the reason for a complete ban in Utah. First, this bill would do nothing to prevent that example, as HB 11 only applies to high school and middle school and does not impact collegiate athletics. And second, if there were a similar example in a Utah high school, the proposed commission would prevent it from happening. Indeed, that is the very purpose of the commission. It would attempt to both protect women's sports and allow our most vulnerable an opportunity to participate. Interestingly, the very legislator who introduced the fourth substitute of the bill called the commission concept brilliant. I do not know if the commission would completely solve this divisive issue, but I appreciate the innovative and respectful approach that it offers. I also believe there is broad misunderstanding around the current rules regarding transgender participation in sports. In particular, from the testimony of many, there seems to be a belief that any biologically born male could simply say he was transgender and begin participating in women's sports. This is incorrect. For many years now, the UHSAA has had in place a rule that only allows male to female transgender participation in women's sports after a full year of difficult transition, hormone therapy, and in consultation with a healthcare professional. This has likely prevented some participation and helped to even the playing field. As a representative of the association stated, "As we read the science right now, we like our policy. This year, we have 4 students who have gone through our paperwork and have not had any complaints from other students or families or school administrators. I should note that while I have some reservations about a policy that requires or incentivizes these transitions, it is the policy in place." Finally, there is one more important reason for this veto. I must admit, I am not an expert on transgenderism. I struggle to understand so much of it, and the science is conflicting. When in doubt, however, I always try to err on the side of kindness, mercy, and compassion. I also try to get proximate, and I am learning so much from our transgender community. They are great kids who face enormous struggles. Here are the numbers that have impacted my decision most: 75,000, 4, 1, 86, and 56. 75,000 high school kids participating in high school sports in Utah. 4 transgender kids playing high school sports in Utah. 1 transgender student playing girls' sports. 86% of trans youth reporting suicidality. And 56% of trans youth having attempted suicide. 4 kids and only 1 of them playing girls' sports. That's what all of this is about. 4 kids who aren't dominating or winning trophies or taking scholarships. 4 kids who are just trying to find some friends and feel like they are a part of something. 4 kids trying to get through each day. Rarely has so much fear and anger been directed at so few. I don't understand what they are going through or why they feel the way they do, but I want them to live. And all the research shows that even a little acceptance and connection can reduce suicidality significantly. For that reason, as much as any other, I have taken this action in the hope that we can continue to work together and find a better way. If a veto override occurs, I hope we can work to find ways to show these 4 kids that we love them and they have a place in our state. I recognize the political realities of my decision. Politically, it would be much easier and better for me to simply sign the bill. I have always tried to do what I feel is the right thing regardless of the consequences. Sometimes I don't get it right, and I do not fault those who disagree with me. But even if you disagree with me, I hope this letter helps you understand the reasons for my decision. Sincerely, Spencer J. Cox, Governor. Wow, I got a little teary reading that. That was an incredible response. Thank you so much, Miranda, for sharing that with us. Very, very good. I love to see it. I really, really love to see it. He's just honest and open, and he admits, look, I don't know everything. I don't know why trans people feel the way they do or need to transition in the first place, but I'm trying to understand. And that's the kind of understanding that we need, the kind of attitude that we need regarding this whole issue. And like he mentioned, it is always so focused on so few. And there's so much outrage regarding the handful of trans athletes that exist in this country, let alone state by state. You see, it's 4 people in Utah and only 1 in girls' sports. Well, this was wonderful to see. Thank you so much.